Greetings, everyone. My apologies. My cat has free reign over this desk and just upsets everything. How is everyone? I hope you're all doing well. Welcome in today. Well, our usual Wednesday reading of our theory and or current events. So welcome YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, and Discord. I hope you're all doing well. Today was a strange day for me. A very strange day. I had a biokineticist appointment, and basically she told me that I move wrong. Like my body just moves in the wrong way. Hey, Virtue. Yeah, apparently my body moves incorrectly. So, yeah. I don't know. Just, I've got to learn to move better. Yes, it is, and it's from the West Bank. It's made in Palestine. I get a lot of really weird stares, especially at the gym that I go to. You can get it from Hirbawi. That's kufia.org. Hirbawi is the only kufia factory still located in Palestine. There are other kufia factories around the world, mostly in Jordan, but Hirbawi is the only one that actually makes kufias inside Palestine, inside the West Bank. So, hello, Taro. So yeah, please go to kufia.org and look it up. Understood. I mean, you could always be sneaky about it and get the sunbird. It is the Palestinian sunbird, which I have on my Christmas tree. Well, we just took down our Christmas tree a couple of days ago. So yeah, Germany is really cracking down on any pro-Palestinian activities. And this is why reading a book like Orientalism is so important. So yeah, we are reading Orientalism by Edward Saïd. Edward Saïd, a Palestinian-American theorist who basically takes apart Western colonialist views on the Middle East in particular. And we're still on part 2 of chapter 2 of Orientalism. We're almost at part 3. We've got like 2 pages left. If I wasn't a mom, I'd be a menace to society right now, but I'm doing my part where I can. Absolutely. You can only do what you are capable of within your capabilities. Do not put your life and your son's life in danger, because we'd rather have you in the fight rather than, detained or otherwise by police. Oh, that's beautiful, Virtue. That is absolutely stunning. I love calling out Zionists, especially like in public places. I didn't call out a Zionist today But I went to a different gym today, and the biokineticist that I went to is at this gym, and there was this lady in like the gym that I went to is in a very fancy area of Johannesburg. And this gym is like, it's ridiculous. Like the membership is, I think, just around about 100 euros a month. And so I saw this woman standing outside in her designer La Perla, head to toe, and smoking a very thin and long cigarette with a full face of makeup for gym, that kind of vibe. And she looked to her friend and she says, so she looks at me up and down, sees, that I am quite rotund. I am potato shaped. And she says to her friend, I don't know why people like her bother. And obviously meant for me to hear. And so I turned to her and I said, at least I can get fit. You will always be a horrible person. And I just kept walking. And I could just hear her friend saying, oh, shots fired. Yeah, I wasn't going to engage. Potatoes are amazing. Potatoes are the foods of the god. All types of potatoes. But anyway, it is 12 minutes past 10 here, South African Standard Time, and we are going to start reading. We are on page 145. So I got one of the earlier editions of the book. One of the earlier modern editions. And this one was printed in 1995. So it still has a lot of errors in it. Hi, love. Thank you for stopping by. And also, do remember that I do these readings for free on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Please, if you can, support the tip goal that I have. All my links are in my link tree. We are back to Renan and his study of Semitic. Ooh, good luck. Good luck in Silico. You're brilliant. Everything will be okay. Hi, Revenant. Good to see you. So he's talking about Semitic. And Renan was the seminal work on Semitic languages. Please go and rest. We are reading Edward Saïd's Orientalism, and that is our usual Wednesday reading. Void, get the fuck out of here. Leave. For Renan, Semitic wasn't so much as a study of the languages as it was an imposition of his ideas on Semitic languages and Semitic people. That imposition of Western imperialism onto these languages. So essentially a judgment upon them. I adore my advisors. It's gonna go well, yeah. Absolutely. You can find it in the Tube of Views. Hi, Witty Kitty. Good to see you. So this is where we stopped, where he constituted that by the scientist studying the work, he makes the work valid. And the nature of the work itself can be perceived as continuous, coherent, and intelligible if it is done through a Western lens. So that is essentially what Renan was saying. For Renan, Semitic is a phenomenon of arrested development in comparison with the mature languages and cultures of the Indo-European group, and even with the other Semitic Oriental languages. So he's looking at Indo-European languages as, and I say Indo-European broadly, and so does Saïd in this sense, because that's how they're classified. But what he's saying is the European languages. They are very reluctant to admit that language structure came from a language such as Sanskrit, which is the oldest recorded and surviving language in the world today. The paradox that Renan sustains, however, is that even as he encourages us to see language as in some way corresponding to the living nature of things, he is everywhere else proving that his Oriental languages, the Semitic languages, are inorganic, arrested, ossified, and incapable of self-regeneration. In other words, he proves that Semitic is not a living language, and for that matter, neither are Semites living creatures. And it's important that he used the French word for creatures here, because he didn't see them as fully human being. Indo-European language and culture are alive and organic because of the laboratory, not despite it. So that is what Renan asserts, is that these languages are only living because of European intervention and European study and the ways in which Europeans examine them. So the laboratory being the European world of scientific exploration. Far from being a marginal issue in Renan's work, this paradox stands, I believe, at the center of his entire work. His style, archival existence in the culture of his time, a culture to which, as people so unlike each other as Matthew Arnold, Oscar Wilde, James Fraser, Marcel Proust concurred, he was an important contributor. Absolutely. To be able to sustain a vision that incorporates and holds together life and a quasi-living creature, or Indo-European European culture, as well as quasi-monstrous parallel inorganic phenomena, Semitic Oriental culture, is precisely the achievement of the European scientist in his laboratory. He constructs the very act of construction is a sign of imperial power over a recalcitrant phenomenon, as well as confirmation of the dominating culture and its naturalization. Making something inorganic, making something unnatural, making something monstrous, reduces it to something to be observed, something to be studied. Have you ever seen the map of which countries had human zoos? And did your country have a human zoo? Can you hazard a guess at which countries had human beings on display in a zoo? Yeah, of course we can guess. It is not too much to say that Renan's philological laboratory is the actual locale of his European ethnocentrism. But what needs emphasis here is that the laboratory has no existence outside this discourse, the writing by which is constantly produced and experienced. Thus, even the culture he calls organic and alive is also a creature being created in the laboratory by philosophical study. This culture that they talk of, this European culture, never existed. It's something that was fashioned, that was created. So, while in the first chapter, we see him saying that Orientalism can only exist in the imagination of the Orientalist, as in the Oriental that we see portrayed in books, in movies, in TV, in all sorts of media, is by the creation of the Orientalist who misconstrues how Europe is, well, misconstrues how the Middle East, well, what they call the Near East to the Far East, the Oriental, is depicted. They control the narrative of how it looks, how it feels, what the people are like, what the languages sound like, what the culture is like, what the food is like. So too is Europe created in this very same laboratory. Because in order for Europe to exist as the antithesis to the Orient, for the Occident to exist as the antithesis to the Orient, it has to be created as such. So false narratives have to be spun about how European history came about, how Europe is so superior in its scientific discovery. So what they did was steal from their colonies and say, this is ours. We made it. Europe is a creation in the European laboratory of philosophical science. Europe as we know it, Europe as it is portrayed in Western media, and so too going from Europe to the larger West. Renan's entire later career was European and cultural. Its accomplishments were varied and celebrated, obviously. Whatever authority his style possessed can, I think, be traced back to his technique for constructing the inorganic or the missing and for giving it the appearance of life. He was most famous, of course, for his Life of Jesus, the work that inaugurated his monumental histories of Christianity and the Jewish people. Yet we must realize that this life, in reference to the book, was exactly the same type of feat that his general history was a construction, enabled by his, as the historian's, capacity for skillfully crafting a dead, or dead for Renan in the double sense of a dead faith and lost faith, Oriental biography. And the paradox is immediately apparent, as if it were the truthful nature of a natural life. So just as they create lies about the Orient, they create lies about the Occident to assert its dominance. Whatever Renan said had first passed through the philosophical laboratory, when it appeared in print, woven through the text, there it was the life-giving force of contemporary cultural signature, which drew from modernity all scientific power and uncritical self-approbation. So when that book is open, it comes alive. The only living thing about the truth of Europe, as portrayed by people like Renan, is when people assert it by digging up his work. For that sort of culture, such genealogies as dynasty, tradition, religion, ethnic communities, these were all simply functions of a theory whose job it was to instruct the world. In borrowing this latter phrase from Cuvier, Renan was circumspectly placing scientific demonstration over experience. Temporality was relegated to the scientifically useless realm of ordinary experience, while to the special periodicity of culture and cultural comparativism, which spawned ethnocentrism, racial theory, and, ultimately, economic oppression. And these were given power far in advance before moral vision was. And that's where we get to kind of where we are today, where all of these little things that made up what we call Western culture kind of lived in these books and lived in these philosophers' heads until their works were perceived, read, and practiced. and they were dangerous. Highly, highly dangerous. And it cost millions of people their lives. Renan's style, his career as an Orientalist and a man of letters, the circumstances of the meaning he communicates, his peculiarity and peculiarly intimate relationship with the European scholarly and general culture of his time, which is liberal, exclusivist, imperialist, anti-human, except in a very conditional sense. These are what I would call the celibate and scientific. Generation for him is consigned to the realm of l'avenir, which in his famous manifesto he associated with science. Although as a historian of culture he belongs to the school of men like Turgot, Condorcet, Guizot, Cousin, Geoffroy, Ballanche, and in scholarship to the school of Saïd, who we discussed earlier, Cousin de Perceval, or Osnam, Fouriel, and Burnoff, Renan is a peculiarly ravaged, ragingly masculine world of history and learning. It is indeed the world, not of fathers and mothers and children, but men like this, like his Jesus, his Marcus Aurelius, his Caliban, his solar god. He cherished the power of science and Orientalist philology, particularly in seeking its insights and techniques, using it to intervene, often with considerable effectiveness, in the life of his epoch. His ideal role was that of a spectator, though. And that I find quite important, because even though empire is built on the lies of the West, we see how these kinds of works being done by quote-unquote spectators made it official in a sense, or made it more believable, because, oh, I'm not from that place, so I can't be biased towards them. Which goes back to what we were discussing yesterday in Renan Edo Lodge's book. Because they're the ones that are comfortable and have set the definitions for society, they are less emotional. They are more objective. And so they define what hate speech is. They define what masculinity is. They define what femininity is. Their definitions rule all because they are assumed to be without bias, because whiteness is assumed to be the natural order. According to Renan, a philologist ought to prefer bonheur to jouissance, like contentment to joyousness. The preference expresses a choice of elevated if sterile happiness over the joys of the world, like sexual pleasure. Words belonging to the realm of bonheur, or general happiness, as does the study of words, ideally speaking. To my knowledge, there are few moments in all of Renan's public writing where beneficent and instrumental role is assigned to women. Of course, because women are seen as way too emotional. One occurs when Renan opines that foreign women, such as nurses and maids, must have instructed the conquering Normans' children, and hence we can account for the changes that take place in their languages. Note how productivity and dissemination are not the functions aided, but rather internal change, a subsidiary one, that man, he says at the end of the same essay, belongs neither to his language nor to his race. He belongs to himself before all, since before all he is a free being and a moral one. Describing man constantly as white. Man was free and moral, but enchained by race, history, and science, as Renan saw them, conditions imposed by the scholar onto man. And so the study of Oriental languages took Renan to the heart of these conditions, and his philosophy made it concretely apparent that knowledge of man was, to paraphrase Cassirer, poetically transfiguring, only if it had been previously severed from raw actuality. Saïd necessarily severed his Arabic fragments from their actuality, actually mistranslating things completely, and put it into a doxological straitjacket. By becoming philology, the study of words as once practiced by Vico, Herder, Rousseau, Michelet, Quinet, lost the plot and its dramatic presentational quality, as Schelling once called it. Instead, it became epistemologically complex. Sprachgefühl was no Sprachgefühl. Sorry, I cannot say that. There's a lot of like umlauts and stuff. Was no longer enough, since the words themselves pertained less to the senses or to the body, and more to the sightless, imageless, and abstract realm that is ruled over by hothouse formulations as race, mind, culture, and nation. Yes.
Nikita, check the chat for a second.
Yes. How do you say it?
Sprachgefühl.
Sprachgefühl.
Yeah, but also pronounce the G.
Sprach.
But not like Gefühl.
Sprachgefühl.
Genau. Oh, exactly. Sorry.
Nice. Yay. I know a German word. Yay. So he's saying that these formulations such as race, mind, culture, and nation are irrelevant to the individual. But basically he's arguing for the Oriental as a collective. So only the European, hello Maoist, so only the European can have that. We always say that it's still the case today that whiteness is the only race that is given the luxury of individuality. Everybody else is seen as a collective. In that realm, which was discursively constructed and called the Orient, certain kinds of assertions could be made, all of them possessing the same powerful generality and cultural validity, as I just explained. For all of Renan's effort was to deny Oriental culture to be right and to be generated, except artificially, in the laboratory. A man was not a child of the culture, and dynastic conception had been too effectively challenged. He taught how one culture is a construct, an articulation, even a creation, but not anything more than a quasi-organic structure. But the one that was actually created was Western. It was the lie. What is especially interesting in Renan is how much he knew himself to be a creature of his time and of his ethnocentric culture. On the occasion of an academic response to a speech made by Ferdinand de Lesseps in 1885, Renan averred how it was sad to be a wiser man than one's nation. One cannot feel bitterness towards one's homeland. Better to be mistaken along with the nation than be too right with those who tell it hard truths. He never told the truth. The economy of such a statement is too perfect to be true. For does not the old Renan say that the best relationship is one of parity with one's own culture? It's morality and ethos during one's time, and not a dynastic relation by one which is either the child of the time or the parent. And here we return to the laboratory, for it is there, as Renan thought of it, that ultimately social responsibilities cease and scientific and Orientalist ones take over. His laboratory was the platform from which the Orientalist he addressed to the world mediated statements he made, gave them confidence in their general precision as well as continuity. Thus, the laboratory, as Renan understood it, redefined not only his epoch and culture, dating and shaping them in new ways, it gave his Oriental subject matter a scholarly coherence. And more, it made him, and later Orientalists, into the Occidental cultural figure they became. We may well wonder whether this new autonomy within the culture was the freedom Renan hoped his Orientalist science would bring, or whether, so far as critical historian of Orientalism is concerned, it set up a complex affiliation between Orientalism and its putative human subject matter that is based finally on power and not really on disinterested objectivity. Every single thing that came out of the West regarding the Oriental was about power. And yes, the first part of this book, well, chapters 1 and 2 especially, go into the structures of Orientalism, the structures of the study, the history. We see how the imagination has informed scholarship. And with that, I am going to take a wee break then, because we get onto part 3. So I shall be right back. I am back. Um, okay. So we get to part 3. Oriental residence and scholarship. The requirements of lexicography and imagination. So here we are still looking at theory. And the way in which the West portrays the Oriental and the Global South in general has always been through its own lens. And that lens has always been one of natural subjugation. So prejudice is at the heart of it. So it's with that understanding that we get to part 3 of chapter 2. Renan's views of the Oriental Semites belonging, of course, less to the realm of popular prejudice and common anti-Semitism than they do the realm of scientific Oriental philosophy. When we read Renan and Saïd, we readily observe the way cultural generalization had begun to acquire the armor of scientific statement and the ambience of corrective study. Corrective here being quite important because they're talking about how things, quote unquote, are and how they should be. Like many academic specialities in their early phases, modern Orientalism held its subject matter, which it defined, in a vice-like grip, which it did almost everything in its power to sustain. Thus, a knowing vocabulary developed, and its functions, as much as its style, located the Orient in a comparative framework. Important to note. Of the sort and employed and manipulated by Renan. Such comparatism is rarely descriptive. Most often, it's both evaluative and expository. Here's Renan comparing typically. One sees that in all things Semitic, the race appears to us to be an incomplete one, by virtue of its simplicity. This race, if I dare use the analogy, is to the Indo-European family what a pencil sketch is to a painting. I mean, what? What? It lacks the variety, amplitude, and abundance of life, which is the condition of perfectibility. Like those individuals who possess so little fecundity that after a gracious childhood they attain the most mediocre virility, the Semitic nations experience their fullest flowering in their first age and have never been able to achieve true maturity. But look at how their song changes when it comes to indigifying European Jewish people into what they call Israel. Because whiteness, white supremacy, the white supremacist delusion is constantly shifting the goalposts. Indo-Europeans here are the touchstone, just they are when Renan says that the Semitic Oriental sensibility never reached heights attained by the Germanic races. Whether this comparative attitude is principally a scholarly necessity, or whether it is disguised ethnocentric race prejudice, we cannot say with absolute certainty because of how it's phrased, but we can actually say it, I think. What we can say is that the two work together in support of each other. What Renan and Saïd tried to do was reduce the Orient to a human flatness, which exposed its characteristics easily to scrutiny and removed from its complicating humanity. In Renan's case, the legitimacy of his efforts was provided by philosophy, whose ideological tenets encourage reduction of language to its roots. Thereafter, the philosopher finds it possible to connect those linguistic roots, as Renan and others did, to race, mind, character, and temperament at their roots. The affinity between Renan and Gobineau, for example, was acknowledged by Renan to be common philological and Orientalist perspectives. In subsequent editions of the general history, he incorporated some of Gobineau's work within his own. Thus did comparatism in the study of Orient and Orientals come to be synonymous with the ontological inequality of Occident and Orient. The main traits of this inequality are worth replicating briefly. I have already referred to Schlegel's enthusiasm for India and his subsequent revulsion from it, and, of course, Islam. Many of the earliest Oriental amateurs began by welcoming the Orient as a salutary derangement of the European habits of mind and spirit. It was overvalued for its pantheism, spirituality, stability, longevity, primitivity, and so forth. Schelling, for example, saw in Oriental polytheism a preparation of the way for Judeo-Christian monotheism. Abraham was prefigured in Brahma. Yet, almost without exception, such oversteam was followed by a counter-response. The Orient suddenly appeared lamentably underhumanized, anti-democratic, backward, barbaric, and so forth. Because they now looked at it through the inadequacies of their own democracies. A swing of the pendulum in one direction caused an unequal and opposite swing back. The Orient was undervalued. Orientalism as a profession grew out of these opposites, of compensations and corrections based on inequality, ideas nourished by and nourishing similar ideas in the culture at large, a culture of domination. Indeed, the very project of restriction and restructuring associated with the Orientalism can be traced directly to the inequality by which the Orient's comparative poverty or wealth besought scholarly, scientific treatment of the kind to be found in disciplines like philology, what we know as philosophy, biology, history, anthropology, or economics. Thus, the actual profession of Orientalists enshrined this inequality and special paradoxes it engendered. Most often, an individual entered the profession as a way of reckoning with the Orient's claim on him, yet most often too his Orientalist training opened his eyes, so to speak, and what he was left with was a sort of debunking project, always with the "no, we are better" attitude, by which the Orient had to be reduced to considerably less than the eminence once seen in it. How else is one to explain the enormous labors represented by William Murr, for example, or Reinhard Dozy, and the impressive antipathy of the work of the Orient, Islam, and Arabs? Characteristically, Renan was one of Dozy's supporters, just as in Dozy's 4-volume History of Spanish Muslims. I cannot translate this French. Jusque la conquête du Andalous par les Almoravides. I don't know what that means. Histoire des musulmans d'Espagne jusque la conquête de l'Andalous par les Almoravides of 1861. If anybody does understand French, please enlighten me. There appear many of Renan's anti-Semitic strictures, compounded in 1864 by a volume arguing that the Jewish people's primitive god was not Yahweh but Baal, proof for which was to be found in Mecca, of all places. Murr's The Life of Muhammad and The Caliphate, in Rise and Decline and Fall, are still considered reliable monuments of scholarship, yet his attitudes towards his subject matter was fairly put by him when he said, "The sword of Muhammad and the Quran are the most stubborn enemies of civilization, liberty, and truth, which the world has yet known." They have been demonizing Islam since then. Many of the same notions are to be found in the work of Alfred Lyle, who was one of the authors cited approvingly by Cromer. Cromer being one of the colonialists whose grave I want to visit to spit on it. Even if the Orientalist does not explicitly judge his material as Dozy and Mir did, the principle of inequality exerts its influence nevertheless. It remains the professional Orientalist's job to piece together a portrait, a restored picture, as it were, of the Orient or Oriental. Fragments such as those unearthed by Saïd supply the material, but the narrative shape, continuity, and figures are constructed by the scholar himself, for whom scholarship consists of circumventing the unruly or the un-Occidental non-history of the Orient with orderly chronicle portraits and plots, such as those from the West. De Perceval's History of Arabs and Islamism during the time of Muhammad, in 3 volumes, 1847 to 1848, is a wholly professional study, depending for its resources on documents made available internally to the field by other Orientalists, principally Saïd, of course, or documents like the text of Ibn Khaldun, upon whom Cousin relied very heavily, reposing in Oriental libraries in Europe. His thesis is that the Arabs were made a people by Muhammad, peace be upon him, Islam being essentially a political instrument, not by any means a spiritual one. Hi.
No, I'm falling asleep by the kittens. She's
Aww,
still
are they okay?
The one is sneezing a lot, but she was feeding.
Okay, that's good.
Then Mum got fed up, so she went off.
I hope Discord says hi.
Are you?
D says hi.
Oh, you still
It's not
busy
just
with
me,
bagels?
it's all of Discord.
Yeah?
You still busy with bagels and things?
Yeah.
Oh, so I didn't put them anyway. You still gonna have? I put the butter chicken back in the fridge.
Okay, that's fine. Hey.
Yeah.
I love you.
Love you.
You annoy me.
My job.
Okay, come here then.
Mm-mm.
Forehead kiss.
Put forward.
Your hands up. He's such a grouch. He is such a grouch. So where did we stop? Arabs were made a people by Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Islam is essentially a political instrument. I mean, the entire idea of every accusation is a confession is so fucking strong here. What? What? Once Christianity was started to be controlled by the West as an institutional entity, it was Christianity that became the political tool, not Islam. What he strives for in clarity amidst a huge mass of confusing detail, what emerges out of the study of Islam is quite literally a one-dimensional portrait of Muhammad, peace be upon him, who is made to appear at the end of his work, after his death, as been described, in precise photographic detail, neither a demon or prototype, This Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a man appropriated into a history of Islam, the fittest version of it, as an exclusively political movement, centralized by the innumerable citations that thrust him up, in a sense, out of the text. Kusan's intention was to leave nothing unsaid about Muhammad, peace be upon him, thereby seen in a cold light, stripped both of his immense religious force and any residual powers to frighten Europeans. The point here is that a figure of his own time and place, Muhammad, peace be upon him, is effaced in order for a slight human miniature of him to be left standing. And that is why Europeans see fit to be so Islamophobic. Because the Prophet of Islam was made into a caricature. Any questions? I don't really want to get into the next part now because this is going into Marxism and Islam. Because, yeah, I think let's leave this for next week. So, earlier on in the server, I streamed a talk by Father David Niehaus. I don't know if anybody joined. I was just streaming it. It was a call that had a whole lot of religious leaders in South Africa talking to Father David Niehaus about faith and activism. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. Please remember that I still have the goal of 90 links in Linktree. And yeah, I do these for free. So please consider the virtual tip jar. Because I still gotta do the capitalism, unfortunately. I would like to continue that conversation because we spoke a lot about faith and activism and how they can exist concurrently. And one of the things that I really do want to do is have a conversation with Father David, because he was South African. He was born in South Africa. And then when he was very young, in this Jewish family who had the birthright, this fake claim to the Holy Land, he grew up in what is now called Israel. And growing up there, he saw the inequality. He saw what was happening to the Palestinian people. And not only converted to Christianity, but became vehemently anti-Zionist and anti-colonial. And when you ask Father David where he lives, he will say that he lives in Palestine. acknowledging that the land was stolen, Palestine was colonized, and Israel is a settler colonial entity, which is so, so important. And he explained that it's not just his faith that guides his activism, but activism that guides his faith. And this is quite typical of somebody of his sect of Christianity that he belongs to, because he is a Jesuit. And if anybody knows anything about the Jesuits, is that their faith is rooted in liberation theology. And if anybody here, anybody listening, has any sort of faith, I suggest you look up liberation theology, because liberation theology is where true activism lies. In the so-called house of God. And if you have any questions about that, please put it in the chat or DM me any of these questions. We had an interesting conversation learning about people's faith, different kinds of faith, and how Christianity in particular has been co-opted to become a force of colonialism, a force of domination. And one of the interesting things that he said was that he finds it so odd how the people who are afraid of equality always imagine equality to look like what they call reverse racism. Number one, rooting racism as a particularly European invention, which it is, but unwittingly doing so while denying it. And secondly, admitting that they have so little imagination that they cannot imagine a world of true equality. In their world, only exists the possibility of domination and subjugation. They cannot imagine true equality. And that's something that I would like to write about at some point. And so I'm going to go to Discord, put my headphones on, and do some writing. I'm going to say goodbye to all of you on YouTube, Twitch, and on the TikTok. So I'm going to tell you to drink water, take your meds, eat something if you haven't eaten today. If you are food insecure today, do let me know. I don't have much to give, but I can give something. Because what I experienced today at that very hoity-toity gym reminded me that it is that kind of ideology that keeps us fighting and keeps me from living my LARPing D&D dream world. Instead, I have to be an activist. So, yeah. Be safe. Ask for help if you need it. Because not asking for help is a form of self-harm. Smash the motherfucking patriarchy. Eat all the white men. And if you don't eat meat, compost them. Feed your oppressors to the land. And solidarity. Be kind to yourselves. Everybody deserves kindness, including you. Yeah. Today's been a weird day. So, I shall take my leave. Cheers, everyone. Thank you for hanging out with me. And listening to my ramblings. I shall see you all tomorrow.